Before I start, I thought I'd give a shout out to my great collaborator, Dr. Ronan Connolly and Dr. Michael Connolly from Ireland. Hello, Ronan and Michael. And then I also wanted to have a little promotion of these infographics that we produce. I hope everybody email us and ask for a copy of this. We really do it with our love of science. And this infographic involves also another Connolly's, which is Dr. Imelda Connolly. And I'm glad today that I don't have to talk much about CO2, but I want to focus in on very key issues of Arctic sea level, Arctic sea ice history. This is really a work that is done of our own free will, so we're really truly independent scientists, independent of fundings and all of that. Okay. So we're going to put UN under this boxing highlight. We really want to check whether what all these statements that has been said about the Arctic, the climate, and of course the sea ice, which is a key factor, signature of our Arctic region, the polar region, whether what has been said by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Changes has any resemblance to the inconvenient truth of reality. So we'll start with that chapter from the AR5. For those who are not familiar with AR5, it's the 5th assessment report. I hope they don't keep producing this. In fact, the 6th assessment is coming up. So we are going to examine what they've been said in this particular report. So I will highlight for now 2 simple questions or statement or claim that has been made by this report. The first thing is about Arctic sea ice and Northern Hemisphere spring snow cover have continued to decrease in extent. And they say this is very high statistical confidence. So let's look at it. First, spring snow ice disappearing from Northern Hemisphere according to IPCC AR5. So how good is that statement, right? Data shows 1965, since we have some satellite coverage, we can actually do a very good documentation of wide area so we can measure these particular changes over time. Indeed, the spring Northern Hemisphere ice snow cover has been decreasing. But I guess the key question that I highlight down there is why did they mention only spring? I hope you all know the answer, right? It's very simple. It's just simply because the fall snowfall has been increasing and then the winter snowfall has been increasing. Too bad that I don't have time to explain why the spring snowfall is increasing. It's probably related to the increasing spring insolation changes over time period due to the orbital changes of the planet perturbing the Earth-Sun geometrical configuration. The second point is, why do they mention only the Arctic? Isn't that convenient? Arctic sea has been decreasing. Yes, we know it's been decreasing. Where's the data? The data is here. On the top panel, you know where polar bear live. That's why we call Arctic. It's been decreasing. But unfortunately, we all know most of us are smart enough now because we are database people. We look into it. It doesn't make sense to only talk about the Arctic and then don't talk about the Antarctic, right? So it is that kind of stuff that make people really don't want to trust UN IPCC. I, for one, would never trust. Ask my son, independent of me, he won't agree with this sort of statement, right? It's ridiculous. But what happened? Remember, this is based on satellite observation, but the key context about science is always is that, okay, we have this measurement, but you know, what is the error bar and what have we seen before, that sort of stuff. But before satellite era, we really have very limited record. In this particular work that we're doing, we went through really enormous amount of work, looking into whaling logs, aerial reconnaissance, icebreaker record, you know, all this stuff, all this good stuff that at least give us a sense of reality because we truly believe in database sort of discussion before we go anywhere else. So this is the way that IPCC report would present the result. The satellite era, we of course highlight for you to see that this is the big difference between satellite era. Because the problem is that we really know that the climate changes, as Don has shown very well, changes on the multi-decadal sense. You have warming, you have cooling in every 50 or 60 years or so kind of oscillation. But look at the pre-satellite era from 1900 or so to, let's say, 1970s. Kind of flat, isn't it? Plus that we know very well that from 45 to about 76 or so, there is a period of cooling that is happening in the Arctic. But how come the sea ice data is so flat? Right? But this is the official record. This is why we are very suspicious of this result, so we went through and checked whether it's true or not, because science is about also verification, independent verification. Obviously, you know that we didn't come up with the same answer as them, so I'll show you later. But we know that from Arctic temperature, by the way, information on sea ice is a lot harder to collect than at least the temperature, even though it is imperfect, but we have a good sense of Arctic temperature covering about 150 years or so over the Arctic. You can see that from 1900 to about 1940, you have a warming period. Then 1940 to the 70s or so is cooling, and then Arctic warming again. Okay? But the key question is, yeah, indeed, even if you have the warming from the 70s, the Arctic sea has been decreasing. But we know that it followed a period of cooling. So where's the evidence for that? That sea ice increasing, actually. It's supposed to increase. So this is the three kind of major problem with pre-satellite data. The first one is actually the data sources for each region is changing over time. So for example, 20s and 30s, you have mostly the ship observation. From the 50s to 70s, you have the really in situ, the buoy, which is really also very key in giving us real information. And then you have region that cover the change over time, okay? Finally, the serious problem is that most of the Arctic was not observed at all. Nobody has the real data to look at these things. So it's imperfect, but here's what we come up with. But we give one example now on this problem from IPCC report, okay? On your left there is basically so-called sea ice map that is produced by the Danish group. They are very, very good in keeping record, of course. But the problem is, when people look at this data, so we pick this example of August 1952, they actually just put the whole area white. It's as if that there is actually sea ice there. But look at the actual cautions that nobody read. Okay, the ice was supposed, but no information is at hand. So they are only guessing. And then, ever since then, because those are the Russian sector, those are the Chukchi Sea and the East Siberian Sea, and you look at the actual data that the Russian just released the data, and we have gotten those data from those great people from St. Petersburg, and they're showing the data like that. You can see what a mismatch of information, okay? Over-exaggeration of the sea ice actually pre-satellite era, showing as if that now the change would be very dramatic. So this is a new work. The paper is already accepted as in the press, so please ask us for the paper in case you want to read in more detail. So no way I can cover this in 15 or 20 minutes. These are Ronan, this is Michael. And this is the paper. Don't read the abstract, just to show you that it is a work that has been accepted for publication. But a very important point that I want to make, which bothers me a lot, is that this work, I'm not even supposed to do it as a scientist, okay? It's not an official work, so it's do it under my own free time and my own volunteer. No expense was covered by anyone or anybody, and we just do it our own fun for learning about the science, okay? That's a big point. To try to make the point that, you don't really need big money to do good quality science. You don't need all these endless charades of asking for funding and all this circus about money this, money that. So for this real work, these are the steps. It's very simple, really. But the main point I want to point you is that for Arctic sea ice, look at the seasonality, how you define it. For summer, it's not June, July, August. It's actually July, August, and September sea ice. You have to account for the real climatology. What happened there? So you really have to be really careful. So what we did is that we divide the data into 3 regions. So we have the North American region, and then the Siberian, the Russian region, and then we have the European region, right? We actually use the information from temperature data. We calculate the temperature trend. We divide into 3 regions and 4 seasons, and then we get the sea ice data, the accurate sea ice data from the satellite era since 1978 or so. And then we work out the relationship between sea ice and temperature for every region. And then don't read into this. Essentially, we use the temperature, the calibration that we have for this period, and then we use the temperature to bring back to 1900. And then the key step is step 6. We use all this available of the sea ice information to check the mean and the variance to try to really adjust it properly with respect to what is actually known from the temperature calibrated sea ice. And then finally we rescale everything. Okay? Please read in detail. This is a very careful work. This is the final result. So what we are able to show is that yes, indeed, the satellite era, because we use the best data from satellite, you have melting, but the period of growth from 43 to 70s is real. It's actually happening. And then you also have all this up and down, right? And then if you compare with the summer extent of the IPCC approved result, you will see that the pre-satellite era is pretty flat. And plus that they never show the actually sea ice increasing in the 40s and the 70s, okay? And this is our summer reconstruction result. If you compare to that, I don't think it's too drastic what is being changed now compared to the past period. And let's look back a little, another question, which is, of course, the IPCC claim. Oh, if we don't do something about this atmospheric CO2. By the way, atmospheric CO2, here it is. Arctic sea ice is continuing to shrink and thin in the northern hemisphere. You know that these are all purely based on computer model. And they've really been making this sort of prophecy about Arctic sea ice disappearing. Should we keep saying this? They say it will soon disappear. You have seen report from 2016, it will disappear by 2016, 2014, 2012, 2013, 2008, and then finally, our good friend Tony Heller, one of these, free independent maverick, who actually also have no funding for this kind of work, he actually found this report from the fake news headquarters, New York Times, showing you that the claim of Arctic sea ice will be gone by 1988. It's really beyond belief, that we could keep believing in this sort of stuff, that it's not happening, and yet we still believe that these people have any credibility of making any claims. And here's the way the IPCC wants to show you. From, let's say, the observation period, they show you, oh, this is so many models, we're producing this, and then by 2100, the scenario, by the way, is very extreme for the rise of atmospheric carbon dioxide, because it believes that the human population by 2100 will be 12 billion people, and then the atmospheric carbon dioxide of the equivalents, if you add methane and all this stuff, will be almost 1,300 parts per million, which is quite a lot. So sea ice, bye-bye. But if you really want to believe in this result, I give you a little caution. Since we have our French realist friends here, this is actually a quote from Pierre Galois, which is the well-known father of the atomic bomb of the French people. And he says that if you put garbage into a computer, nothing comes out of it but garbage. But this garbage, having passed through a very expensive machine, is somehow ennobled and no one dare to criticize this. Actually, my son just taught me a trick. This is a lot better to say this. IPCC want to tell you that this is a truck. This is a truck. Okay? This is not a model. Thank you, Franklin. If you look at the computer model, this is what they produce. It's decreasing. This is our reconstruction. They basically are very flat from those periods and then saying that, oh, CO2 come along, it's going to decrease. But I truly believe that this is really a natural kind of variability, even including what we observe by now, 2016. There's just no way you can make that claim. Yeah, it's the CO2 that did it, right? There's a murder in the room. And then finally, if IPCC blames CO2, what is it that could do it? Could it be the sun? That's the question. For those full disclosure, again, I just wanted to study science, okay? So in terms of solar variability, you can see, I happen to choose to use that curve from the left. And then IPCC always promoted this particular curve and never ever discussed why the other curve could be wrong or right, okay? It's always promoting this because they just want to believe in these particular people. And I show you now the results that we can produce with the Arctic sea ice, Arctic surface temperature. This is the paper that has been published. The blue curve is the temperature, and then the red curve is actually the solar irradiance changes over time. Okay, I think the fit is pretty good. And this paper has been peer-reviewed and published. We published this a year ago. So I hope everybody, if you have more questions, please ask me or Ronan and Michael for reading. But are these Arctic sea ice change really new? Okay, that's another question that I want to answer before I finish. I'm almost done. Please don't keep flashing me. And it's based on a paper from Germany, a Professor Rüdiger Stein. I have already contacted them. This is actually a very good study that just came out about, you can see, three weeks ago. And what they are able to do is basically collected this ocean sediment by around the Chukchi Sea and East Siberian Sea region. I'm going to show only the result from Chukchi Sea. This is a very clever technique. It's actually plankton, studying plankton, and you study a very special biomarker. It's from a fat, lipid form. It's called ice proxy 25 carbons. Okay, it's a very clever technique. So they can measure it. It's kind of unique, so it's very good work that's been going on. So despite all the problem, I think we do have some interesting work. So they produced this new paper. Currently, around the area, you have basically seasonal sea ice. Seasonal sea ice just mean that you have sea ice in the winter, and then summer, when it's warm, when it's extremely warm, it will be ice-free. But is this unusual? I hope you know the punchline. For Chukchi Sea, sorry for the graph, but it shows you that you basically can have 3 categories of sea ice. One is basically the reduced, which is actually often ice-free. You can see large part of the Holocene, 10,000 years ago until 6,000 years ago, it's always ice-free, okay? And then you have the perennial extreme, which is of the sea ice is filled all year round. So for this region, we have never seen it. For now, we basically mostly seasonal sea ice. So you can see that the sea ice actually hasn't been perennial for the last 10,000 years, and it's often reduced during the Bronze Age and earlier, right? The Bronze Age is about 3000 BC to about 500 BC or so. So, and the sea ice coverage changes over a century time scale, and this seems to have relationship with solar activity as shown by Professor Stein. So I'm done now. The question is, Arctic sea ice indeed has been decreased since 1970, but the key point is simultaneously Antarctic sea ice is increasing. We really need to answer the question instead of just saying, oh, looking at just specific evidence that we found CO2. Obviously, it's not CO2 doing that. Then, you can see that it was increasing from 1940 to 70. Can IPCC try to explain that with rising CO2? Then you can see that IPCC's conclusion, especially those future projections another 85 years from now, is based on computer models. I mean, those things are as good as my modeling work, right? So it's not good. It's really not good work at all. And then finally, Arctic sea ice has been repeatedly advancing and retreating long ago, since before the Bronze Age. Was anybody driving SUV then? So I also conclude that from all that I know, I look into this, it's really that maybe related to the sun, although, we don't come here to bang our chest that I'm so smart that I found the sun to be doing that. Science is a continual journey of keep testing and retesting your ideas and your hypotheses and based on what the data is available. So I propose that IPCC should start taxing the sun if they don't like this idea. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have 10 or 12 minutes for questions, I believe. 10 minutes for questions. I ask that you raise your hand to be recognized. I will recognize you. Tim will bring over a microphone. Do not start speaking until Tim gets the microphone. Please identify yourself as well, please.
Yes. First of all, I have to excuse myself for my poor English, especially because I used to form complicated sentences. So, in case you don't understand, please interrupt me. Number 2, my name is Michael Limburg from Germany, EIKI. Thank you for mentioning us, Fred. So this is my identification. And then I would like to add 2 remarks to the 3 speeches. Number 1 is the winter in Germany becomes cooler since the last 30 years. That's what we found out using the official data of the Met Office in Germany. Number 2, and that's the most important, my feeling is that the error propagation and the error identification is not well done in research. I know, besides me, just one person who did a lot of work there, this Pat Frank. And when you do this, the unavoidable systematic errors prevent you for getting precise data. That might be the answer why Fred found out that 8 data sets don't fit with each other, and you can find out what you will. Everybody can look what he will. You did a lot of research there. But the only exception for the uncertainty, which is rather big,
Sir,
which is not involved,
you have a question?
comes through too, is the oscillations. You see oscillations in all these curves, and they are always the same. But the 1/10 of a degree measurements are not producible by other data sets because you forget the huge data margin which is accompanied with the data.
Good comment. I think it was a comment, not a question. But then, yeah, in general, is that I think people oversold their products. I mean, there are times in which in science you really have to say you don't know, and then you cannot quantify even these things. I'm sorry. Sometimes error bars is just a misnomer also, because it's not an error bar. A lot of this time you simply don't know. There is no, problem is actually the homogeneous sampling of these results. It's just ridiculous. Things are going out of proportion to the point where IPCC is putting this strange stuff about likeliness, 95%. Those are all sociology it will really should put all of these people in hell. If there's a place for this, there will be a very special place I'll create for them. Please go there. It's just nonsense. Cut it out, every little kid will even know that this is wrong.
I ask that we have to be quick. Comments? No. Questions? Yes, please.
Ben Dennison with 21st Century Science and Technology. Hello? Okay. Ben Dennison with 21st Century Science and Technology. For Dr. Soon, a few years ago there was a number of studies saying the sun was going to a longer-term weakening period, potentially. Magnetic field around sunspots getting weaker, certain subsurface processes indicating that not just a regular 11-year minimum, but potentially going into some kind of new Maunder minimum or Dalton minimum level reduction in activity in the coming decades, half century or so. Do you have any opinions on that? Do you think that's something we're heading into?
The detail, we should carry it outside, but I'm a lifelong researcher on the physics of the sun. I have to tell you that I'm taking a bit of an agnostic view on it, because again, I need to stay consistent with this problem about information we don't have. You even mentioned the internal part of the sun. There's just really not much data point there. There are some interesting hints, but then a lot of this stuff, I think, put it this way, we're not ready to quote unquote offer a scientific prediction. That's my claim. But of course, you can always do a lot of statistical extrapolation. They are useful for certain level of discussion, but if you want to call it science, I think it's very hard to justify it from my point of view, because I think we still need to be cautious. As much as you criticize IPCC for predicting the error of CO2 and then forcing the climate, and you have to be careful about what you can predict about the suns or not. That's my opinion.
Hi, Susan O'Toole with the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. I'm probably the only federal worker here who follows these conferences, and thank you very much for these excellent presentations. Dr. Soon, I'd like to ask, all of you are always quoting the IPCC. Have you ever had an opportunity or attempted to bring the IPCC together so you could have a dialogue or debate together in public about what they are claiming and what you are claiming?
If the question is towards me, I think you didn't see my white hair. I really have a lot of white hair. I have tried a lot. You can check back. Second and third assessment, IPCC cited my work very prominently. And then all of a sudden, because we're running out of favor in a sense, okay? Oh yes, we tried for years and years and years. But the strategy has becoming so bad now, I would just say we just have to close IPCC. Seriously, just close it, because they are really anti-science movement. There are too many of these people now growing too large, and year by year, every year is just conferences here and there. Nothing has been done, not serious about science, never want to talk about anything. I'm willing to help them, please. Tell IPCC to contact Willie Soon. It's very easy to find me. No problem. If they want to see me, come see me. Set appointment.
Michael, thank you for your comment and your question. I want to respond very briefly. What happened during the last decades of the 20th century was a drastic change in the method of observation, both for ocean and for land. On ocean, we introduced floating buoys for the first time, and they gradually took over. And on land, we cut the number of stations drastically and put them in places of airports. This change in the observing population is the basic reason why there has been a reported warming, which does not exist. That is the main conclusion I've come to. I still don't know, and we need to work on what happened to the rise in CO2. It must produce some kind of an effect.
Fred, can I add one more statement about his result? I have to say that if you guys study our paper in 2015, we reconstructed the northern hemisphere temperature using only the rural to try to get rid of so-called non-climatic effect. We clearly see what Fred is claiming, which means 1940s is warm, 30s, 40s warm, and then it cools, and then it warms up again, but then the high at the 21st century is more or less the same. It really shows that the bias of this last one is very clear, that it's a non-climatic type.
Observationally, we have to ask whether the pause in global warming will continue, as it has existed now since 1940. There's been no warming observed, consistent warming, whether it will continue. If it continues, then we have to look for various mechanisms that can offset the effects of CO2. I look for negative feedbacks. I can distinguish 3 kinds of negative feedbacks, but the discussion gets a little complicated, and I will not pursue it now, except in private conversation. If anyone wants to discuss it, please come and see me, and I will be happy to discourse on it.
This will be the last question.
Hi, Adam Wildavsky, representing myself. I have a question for Dr. Easterbrook or anybody who cares to answer. What would your scientific opponents say about your presentation today?
They would probably have apoplexy would be my first response. And my response to all of the assertions of things that are made by the alarmists is let's talk evidence. My whole career is essentially a purveyor of evidence, and the facts speak for themselves. And so I would argue that the factual information that we now have, some of it's clear, some of it's cloudy, some of it is obscure. But there's some things we know almost for sure. And some of those things I presented today, my guess is that their response would be that, he's just one of those deniers, and so you can't believe anything he says.
Thank you all for being here today. We have another session in approximately 5 minutes, so if you're going to be in this session, just stay along. If you've got the next door session, please get ready to go over there. Thank you again.